Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. Thank you very much for joining me as I talk about mega clots, big clots, huge clots, not the kind of little clots that we think about with long COVID like microclots. These are the clots that cause thromboembolic events, pulmonary embolus, deep vein thrombosis, blocking arteries to the heart, strokes, those bigger clots. Now, the problem is that this has been being noticed since 2021. Embalmers were observing this, and one of them here in the center, Richard Hirschman, he was in effect the center of the stage when it came to this video, died suddenly. Got a lot of attention and then it seemed to die down. But largely through the work of Thomas Haviland, who continues to raise questions about it, it hasn't completely disappeared. Important point, because clots are occurring. And what I'll be doing today is a number of connections. I'm talking about COVID, but in reality, it's about COVID in the context of prior immune stimulation, if you understand what I mean. And that's an important discussion because we have high circulation of COVID at the moment, and this is evidenced all around us. This is from the New York Times on the COVID off ramp, no isolation tests or mask. I'll be coming to this article shortly. And critically, I'll be talking about this very important paper, thrombosis of the vasa vasorum of the large and medium-sized pulmonary artery. So these are important topics that need to be addressed, things that we need to think about. What is the science that could be causing embalmers to see such unusual patterns in their day-to-day activity? Before we start, as usual, I want to first tell you the breaking news. We have just opened up YouTube memberships. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to set up a system, a platform where you get to participate and support the research. The reality is that this takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and the time is valuable. There's lots of things that go in the background for setting this up and doing all the research. And your small contribution is going to help to make sure that this continues so that you get valuable information, cutting edge information, information that's ahead of the curve just because we are still doing the research. Additionally, what I'd like to encourage you to do is join us in the preparation for Disease X. Now, in truth, I think Disease X is just going to be technically COVID rebranded. Are you prepared? What is happening? So you can come along and you can join with us by helping to support our Kickstarter, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. And guess what? If you do that, we will give you Capital Conversations. This is an excerpt from very important Senate discussion in the United States, where lots of experts came together and had very detailed discussions about COVID and the pandemic. The problem is that it was so long that many people can't be bothered to listen through the whole day. We have collated the information in a simple, easy to understand ebook. So make sure you look at that. And finally, coming up is our next health and wellness webinar, and we'll be doing part 2. This is part of our series, and we want you to join with us because outside of the fact that we have YouTube membership, this is where we also get to answer questions. Now, I can't tell you exactly what to do, but I can give you direction based on my knowledge about how the health systems work, how doctors think, questions to ask, investigations you may need to discuss with your doctor. But it makes such a difference when you understand what's going on, just giving you a scientific understanding and helping some people to know what is going on in and around them. So getting back to the science, we have an issue here with regards to ongoing high circulation of COVID. Now, as I said, just as the article pointed out, people have just moved on. They're just ignoring it. And this is what it said. This was in Yahoo News, 27th of August. And it's showing you here that people are out and about at their normal activities. And in this case, this person here was away on a family road trip. The son had a cough and fever. Was it COVID? It would have threatened their whole plans. Guess what? Everybody just moves on. Even if it was COVID, so what? And you can see as they go down here, they highlight that in this fifth summer of COVID, cases are surging. CDC has reported high or very high levels of the virus in wastewater in almost every state. And the rate of hospitalization with COVID is nearly twice what it was last summer, and deaths as well. Here is the problem. People don't even recognize what's causing the hospitalizations and deaths because it's not going to be typical severe respiratory COVID. That is in the past. It only occurred because it was a novel virus. The immune system had not seen it before. Once it has seen it, either through natural immunity or even vaccination, the kind of infection and the impact it has is going to be very, very different. The critical thing that I have learned from my research, my 4 years of research, do not let this virus get into your bloodstream. That's the point. And that's where the link comes to these megaclots. This is what I think is happening, serum viremia. This is driving the pathology that we are likely to be seeing in the context of what is going on now. So let's get to what it is that the paper is about. I'll show you some slides as to why it's important. Then we'll go back to the paper to get a good understanding of what's happening. This paper here was published in May of 2024. It's not in a big paper, it's an autopsy case report. The critical thing about it is that it's an autopsy. That's what stands out to me. And I want to give credit to the authors here because they're from the West Indies. You have here Hubert Daisley is from Trinidad, somebody here from Jamaica, Aneko Ako. You have somebody else from Anguilla, Trinidad as well, Jamaica. This is a Caribbean flavor autopsy study. And I am very appreciative of that because I know that there's some phenomenal clinicians in the West Indies. And I'm sure about that as well. And what it is that they're doing is the kind of work that needs to be done. We need autopsy data. And what they were looking at is they were looking at the vasa vasorum in relation to clots in the lungs. So this is in a bit more detail as to what it's about. What they were looking at here was this vasa vasorum of the large pulmonary vessels is involved in the pathology of COVID-19. Now, this very special microvasculature plays a major role in the biology and pathology of the pulmonary vessel walls. Now, this piece of information is really critical when I start to think about the abnormal clots that the embalmers are seeing, and not just the embalmers. I have to tell you, if you have not seen this video as yet, are embalmers clots occurring in the living? This is seismic. It's only available on my Substack, but it has already, and this is one of the biggest videos I've had on the Substack. It's 290 likes, 249 comments. Now, I just pause here before I go any further because some people are squeamish. If you are squeamish, look away now. I'll just glance through them so that you can see what it's about. But let's get back to it here. He brought out the clots. This is what was happening in the living. This is a small one that he had. Look at these big ones. This was in the blood vessels of the legs. You know, this is what they saw on the scans. This one here was in the lungs, massive clots. So it's not just the embalmers that are seeing them. These are clots that are occurring all the way through. Look at the size of this. This is the inferior vena cava. So what we have here is that these clots are occurring and are very, very significant. What is the mechanism that is causing it to occur? That's the question. This is where we get into the science around exactly what is going on. And I'm going to show you some slides here because in order to understand the science, you have to be able to get the picture as to how things look in the body. So let's start with some basic stuff. We've got here an image of the body with the inferior vena cava and the descending aorta. Red usually represents arteries. It splits into the iliac arteries down here, going down into the legs. And coming up as well in blue, you have the iliac veins, which will then meet the inferior vena cava and go back to the heart. This is how the blood is pumped from the heart. It comes back up from the legs to the heart to be pumped again. This big blood vessel is where you can have very major clots occurring. Now, this part is very important, and you have to follow me with regards to the science. This is an image of an artery. Okay, on the inside of an artery, it's very smooth. Okay, the lining cells, very thin, very smooth. It has a very thick muscle layer. And so what that means is that because there's so much muscle in these bigger vessels, arteries, and the bigger veins, it can't get the oxygen supply from inside the artery. And so you have on the outside of it, you have these small blood vessels. These are called vasa vasorum, and they transmit all the oxygenated blood in and around this whole thing so that it feeds the oxygen to the muscles of the blood vessels. What it seems is that these get caught up in COVID. And we know for certain they certainly can get caught up from the spike protein from vaccination, as we've seen a case with regards to that. So this is a very important piece of information about what exactly happens with these arteries. But it's not just the arteries, and this is what I found that was really, really important, is that it also is present in the big veins. This is the inferior vena cava. And you can see here, even though it's thinner, so there's a lot less muscle, but there's still muscle present there, they have as well in the lining these vasa vasorum. And again, they're supplying oxygen to all these muscles and tissues around here. This is where it links to the science, because if these get involved in inflammation and cause death and damage to the lining around the blood vessel, it's going to damage the lining of the blood vessel as well. What would then happen is that because these cells are involved, you would form a clot. And these clots could then go somewhere else. But in the case of the embalmer's clots, they seem to be getting really, really big. So these are not just small clots, these are large clots. And we still have to fully understand the mechanism as to why that is occurring. It's a very important piece of the puzzle. But that was just to lay the foundation of what this paper was about when they are talking about these abnormal clots that they found in just 3 cases. So let's go back to the science and look at the paper. Here we have, and again, as usual, we talk about the introduction and where it came from. This is just standard stuff that comes from any paper that is published. And what you can see down here is that I wanted to focus on the fact that the histological samples of all the lungs, it was just 3 cases, all right, that were relevant. And critically, they mentioned the fact that vaccines have provided some amelioration of the disease. Now, the reason that that's important is because they didn't specify whether or not the person was vaccinated. That's actually a very important point. And it seems I usually assume they are unless they are said that they're not. Quite normally, they will say this unvaccinated person had severe COVID and so on and so on. So if they have not mentioned the vaccinated status and this was published in 2024, my assumption is that these individuals were likely to have been vaccinated. So what they were, and let's get now back to the science of it. Here we go. All the patients, so the patients were all male, aged 45, 68, and 63 years old. The three of them had diabetes, one had prostate cancer, and the infection was confirmed at autopsy with reverse transcriptase RCT-PCR. So they recognized that they had COVID. But what was relevant about these cases is that what they had found, and I'll come back to it because I'm going to have to show you that in a second. What they had found was the fact that these three patients all passed away at home. Okay, so that's the important thing. This is why I think this is so relevant. These three patients, they didn't come into hospital, so they were found and they tested them and found that they were positive for COVID, and they had been found to have significant clots in terms of these patients. So here, this is a bit that I wanted you to see. It has it here. We conducted autopsies on 3 patients who had SARS-CoV-2 infection and died at home. That's the important bit. They died at home. All right, they were not put on ventilators. All 3 died at home and were found to be positive for COVID. This is why I'm telling people, do not underestimate how significant this is with regards to ongoing circulation. Now follow this. This is how it works with infection. Now, in this case here, they did histological sections of all the lung samples. And what they found was that fibrin thrombi deposits were seen in alveolar capillaries, precapillary arterioles, and collecting venules. So this is like small microclots that we would see as well with COVID. But interestingly, even though they had these clots, there was not an association with inflammatory cells. So this is just clotting occurring on its own, even without any damage to the lung, any significant damage to the lung. True pneumonia was not present. But what they found was thrombosis of the vasovassorium interna and externa of the large, medium, and small pulmonary arteries and veins. This is the bit that I'm telling you is extremely significant. So in effect, they had thrombosis as well of some of the capillaries and the bronchial capillaries, and thrombosis of the pulmonary arteries and veins of varying sizes was evident. In effect, what they found was not a lot of inflammation except in the lining of the blood vessels and lots of clots, but without the typical inflammatory process that we normally see in severe COVID-19. And I think it's important. I need to take you back to what I showed you in the first place with regards to what these vasovassorum look like. Remember, they're in the lining outside of the blood vessel. This is where they were finding all the inflammation and the clots. And what then happened is that you had damage to the lining of the blood vessel, which then caused clots. Now, remember, this was in the pulmonary artery and vein, so they are not as thick as this. It would probably be more closely approximated to this, like what happens in the inferior vena cava. And again, this would be where the inflammation would be occurring with clotting. Really, really important stuff. This is why I'm saying to people, we need autopsies. We don't need people guessing what's going on. We need autopsies, because without autopsies, we can't be sure as to what is happening. This is part of what I'm anticipating with the COVID storm. Spike-triggered autoimmune response mechanism. Once you're talking about inflammation in those vicinities of the vasovassorum, That is in keeping with a condition that we call Kawasaki's disease. It's an autoimmune disease. So it fits perfectly with what I anticipated would be happening around COVID. Very, very serious impact that this could have. And it would explain why we're likely to see a higher increase in clots. This is not everybody, but we're going to be seeing, I predict after this super spreading event, far more significant clots occurring from different people at different times. It will also explain what was happening with the embalmers, and it would increase the likelihood that they would continue to see this kind of pattern in the near future. There's still many things that we have to learn, still many journeys and hurdles we have to overcome. But the critical thing is that we need answers, and we need them urgently. Please don't ignore the significance of what can happen around the COVID circulating. Everyone needs to be protected. Everyone needs to find ways to protect themselves and their families. Final points. Just remember, YouTube membership is open. Please, if you are interested and you want to support the science, click on the join button and you will get a chance to be able to be part of this research journey with us. And just so that you don't forget, are you prepared against disease X? Get the free ebook and you about capital conversations, and join us when we launch this Kickstarter program. We are bringing the information for you so that you don't have to be so worried about the future. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you more information in the near future. Have a great evening.